Okay, so good evening and welcome to our continuing path, finding our path upwards and upwards closer to Hashem, Zat Hashem, Mesilas Yesharim. We're talking about the idea of the elements of what's called Chassidus, piety, going beyond the letter of the law. As we said in previous weeks, this really divides into three areas: what consists of Chassidus, how you carry out these actions of Chassidus, and what's the kavanah behind them. As we put it, the what, the how, and the why. We're in the middle of the how. What's the manner in which you perform these acts of mitzvahs and raise them up to that which is beyond the normal, the required level to achieve this idea of saintliness, of Chassidus, of piety. And we spoke last week about the idea of Cain and Hevel, who was brought the best of the flocks, and Hashem accepted his offerings, and his brother Cain brought fruits, but they were the rejects, they were B grade, and Hashem rejected it. Now you could still say, well, it's still an offering, but the sort of offering that you bring really shows very much about your attitude to the person or who you're bringing it to. If you're bringing a present to a king, as we saw last week, or an important state governor, you bring the best quality, because bringing sub-quality, B-grade fruit or whatever it is really is in a way, it's a big insult than not bringing anything. Because when we compare Hashem's loftiness with our lowliness, surely we must do everything that we can on the best possible level, because we're starting off, so to speak, on who are we to in the first place bring an offering to Hashem? And so therefore, if it is something that we want to bring, it must be something of the very, very best that we can manage. And anything less than that is really an insult. There's a lovely story about Shalom Shvadron, who was a big Magid, somebody who used to go around inspiring people. And there's a story that apparently on Erev Yom Tov, a poor person knocked on his door. And he just got back from England, and he brought out this beautiful shirt that he bought in, Harrods or somewhere, or Selfridges, some expensive shirt, which was, he was keeping it for Yom Tov, and he took it out and he showed it to the Oni, and to this poor person, and he put it back in the bag, and he said, "Here, you take it." So when he'd left, his children said, "But Tati, why did you do that? If you didn't have any money, at least give him one of your other shirts. Why give him your best shirt?" He said, he brought out a Rambam, and he said that he read them the passage that said, if you're going to clothe the naked, he should clothe them with the finest of his clothing, because all of the best should be given to Hashem. So the mitzvah tzedakah is you do it the best possible way. You don't just say, well, he's a pauper anyway, so this least of my shirts is probably better than anything that he's ever had. No, if you're honoring Hashem by doing his mitzvahs, then you have to do it in the best possible way. Let's move on. V'oima v'oro noichel yeshva edra v'chol noida v'zovech v'shachas l'Hashem ki melech gadol ani. So it says about someone who brings inferior animals as offerings to Hashem, and Malachi, cursed be a charlatan, like a criminal who has a superior ram in his flock, but he says a neder, I'm going to bring Hashem an animal, and he brings something which is blemished. He has much better than that. You can't do that. I am a great king, says Hashem, master of legions, Keltz of Hakois, and my name is awe-inspiring among the nations. So another way that a person has to be very careful. For example, if you're holding a Sefer Torah, the Mishnah Berurah says that you can touch the handles of a Sefer Torah, but it's a rather frightening thing that it says that Kol ha'ochei Sefer Torah oroim, nikba orim. Anybody who holds a Sefer Torah naked, meaning that he touches the parchment of the Sefer Torah, he will be buried naked. Now, if you look at the Gemara there, and it doesn't mean that quite literally. What it really means is as I said, the Mishnah Berurah says you can touch the poles of a Sefer Torah for sure, do Hagba. What it means is that when he'll be buried bereft of this mitzvah, he will be, so to speak, naked of this particular mitzvah that he was performing while touching the Sefer Torah. In other words, let's say you were studying, learning Torah from a Sefer Torah. So if you were touching the Sefer Torah, the parchment itself at the time you were learning, then you would lose the mitzvah of Talmud Torah. It would be stripped from you, so to speak. Another example of this, of proper reference for mitzvahs, is when we're talking about Bikurim. Now, Bikurim, that is a ceremony of bringing the first fruits up to Yerushalayim. And it was done with tremendous pomp, tremendous ceremony, and people would go out to meet the people bring up the Bikurim. They brought them all the way up to Yerushalayim. And that's really an indication to show us how it is that we are supposed to be mahadeh, to beautify the mitzvahs. And the Mishnah says is in Bikurim, it says over there, Hashor holech nefnechem v'karnov matzupos. They, along with the Bikurim, they would bring an offering of a shore. People would pool their money together and bring an ox as part of the offering. And they overlaid the horns with gold. They hung a wreath around its neck of olive branches. Olive branches because the olive tree is one of the most mushubach of all the trees of Eretz Yisrael, indigenous to Eretz Yisrael, because its leaves are always fresh. And then it says that the wealthy, Hashir Meviim Bikurehem, but Kolossos Shel Zahav. They wouldn't just bring the Bikurim, the first fruits, but they put them in golden baskets. Again, the whole idea is to be mahadeh, to beautify the mitzvah. And it says even the poor who couldn't afford that, they would aniyim besale nitzarim. They would bring them in baskets of willow branches. But these willow branches, the willow is peeled. So make it more white and make it more beautiful. Again, each of us on our level. For a poor person, he can't afford gold, but he could take the willow branches and rather than just leave them as they were, he can peel them and make them look whiter and more beautiful. And also we see there's a hiddur in the Magdus. Shalosha midos b'bikurim, to says bikurim, ve'ito bikurim. There are three kind of aspects to bringing the mitzvah of bikurim of the first fruits. The first fruits themselves, and the things which are called tosefes bikurim, which is supplemental bikurim, and the adornment of the bikurim. So, to explain this, whether the tosefes bikurim were actually the same species as the bikurim, but they were added to the basket. Why? Because it made the bikurim seem more substantial. In other words, to give the whole thing an appearance of something more substantial, more beautiful. Then the adornment of the bikurim, we said before, is decorating the baskets, having beautiful baskets, and also hanging fruit outside the basket. Again, the whole idea, which is to, many more details in the Rambam, in Hilchos Bikurim, you can see of how they did this. The whole idea was to make the mitzvah as impressive, as honorable, as honored, and as important as possible. And this, of course, serves for us as a paradigm that we can extrapolate to every mitzvah that we do. Where anytime you have a mitzvah to do, a person should think to himself, how can I do this in the best possible way? How can I beautify this? How can I make it more beautiful? And we're going to see that actually this is really, a case in point here, is that we're not talking about this. The concept of hiddur mitzvah, that a person is supposed to spend more money, an extra third on buying, let's say you have an esrog, and you can afford to spend an extra third of the value of this esrog, you should do that. That's really a hiddur in the mitzvah itself. That's where the mitzvah, the esrog itself, is a better esrog. But we see that this extends also to the adding other fruit, which is not part of the mitzvah itself. The fruit isn't better fruit, so to speak. It just makes the whole ceremony, the whole performance of the mitzvah from the outside, externally, not the intrinsic value of the mitzvah, better. And that's also called hiddur mitzvah. In other words, the whole point of hiddur mitzvah isn't just limited to the mitzvah itself, but anything connected to it, because of course, the whole principle going on here is to show kavod, to show honor to the mitzvah, and then obviously by showing honor to the mitzvahs, ultimately to honor Hashem. It says, for example, before davening, Rava would put on fine footwear. He changed it, put these silk slippers or whatever they were, and because he says, it says in the pasuk, "Hikoin lekras Elokecha Yisrael," prepare to meet your God Yisrael. It's a pasuk in Amos, and they also said that the Chazal on the pasuk Big Day Esav Bana Hachomudois. In other words, when Rivka took the garments of Esav and clothed them on Yaakov, her younger son, Amar Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel said, all the days that I served my father, I never served him even 1/100th as respectfully as Esav served his father Yitzhak. Ani shamati es Abba v'chulei, I would serve my father while I was wearing soiled garments. But when setting out to travel, I'd make sure I had a nice clean suit of clothes on. Aval Esav b'shehaya meshamesh aviv lo haya meshamesh ela b'big day malchus. He would put on literally royal garments in order to serve his father. In other words, that's the idea of covered given from the fact that the way you dress. Now, hine imkach the boss of Adam. If that's the way we have to choose the appropriate, respectful attire for performing the service of a flesh and blood human being. So kal v'chomer lemelech malach emlochim. How much the more so Hashem, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, shehu omid lefonov lispalel rui shehu shielbush big day chavod. Therefore, when a person is standing in front of Hashem, it's so important when you're davening. Davening, and the whole essence of davening is to be lifnei Hashem. I'm in front of Hashem. So when a person comes in front of, and the interesting halachas come out from this, because of course it's all according to the what's considered to be respectable in the place where you live. Could be, there's many stories about, for example, there was a Talmud of Rav Moshe Feinstein Zatzal, who whenever he would call the Rebbe up on the phone, he would put on a hat before he asked the Shaila and stand up. The Rebbe couldn't see him, right? But he was way of being mechabed, and we're talking about flesh and blood. So when a person gets up to davening, the question is often asked, should I wear a hat when I'm davening? So the answer really is, if you'd feel uncomfortable not wearing a hat, then you should. In other words, let's say you're going to go and meet the King of England. If you dress in shorts and a t-shirt, and you feel that's fine, right? You don't feel there's a lack in your honor. I'm not saying this la halacha. Obviously, the body has to be covered. But let's say within the parameters of halacha, what's called covered varies very much from one society to another. Back I guess in Victorian days, everybody wore what they call frock coats. Only Rosh Hashivas wear them. But back then, to wear a short jacket, you'd probably look like a workman. So again, back then, maybe 150, 200 years ago, an Orthodox Jew would wear a long coat because a short coat was not considered sufficiently. Again, the whole thing is, but the general rule is within, of course, given that you're observing the halachic parameters of what's considered to be suitable clothing for davening. The next question is, would I be happy to be received by a king of flesh and blood dressed like this? Would I feel that I'm not really dressed up properly? So if that would be the case, then go and put a hat on. If not, then that's okay. A person should comport himself like one who sits before a great human king. So I saw that he has a very nice story here about the Imre Emes, Rav Avram Mordechai from Gur, one of the Ger Rebbes. He once had a meeting with a high-ranking government official, and he felt it was necessary for him to take off his weekday hat and put a better hat on. And so he went and he had the meeting, and they came out just before Mincha. and one of his attendant, his mashbak, brought over to him his regular day hat. He said, "What? You must be joking. I just spoke to an official of flesh and blood, and I put on a better hat. I'm going to take that out of now to go and speak to a Kodesh Baruch with a lesser good hat." So, all these have the same theme. Now let's carry on and talk about honoring Shabbos and Yom Tov. There's it says about Shabbos, v'chibadato, and you should honor it. V'chein shekava his ames lonu shekavodo mitzvah. We've already known that the honoring of Shabbos is part of the mitzvah. It's not just a question of not driving cars, not turning on lights, not doing malacha, but there's the making Shabbos an important part of that is to honor Shabbos. And there are many ways we can do this. Anything we can think of to honor Shabbos, we should do. Really, as we said before about other mitzvahs. And here again he says the same idea, that even preparation for Shabbos is something that is considered to be hiddur mitzvah, even though it's not the mitzvah itself. For example, there's a famous Gemara at the beginning of, first of all, let's see, he says, it brings some other ideas. Rav Safra, Rabbi Abau, Haya Yosef, Ba'ataktecha, it's like an ivory stool, to show that he was performing a distinguished task, and he would fan the fire. He had to use a special stool just to fan the fire for the cooking of the food on Shabbos. And there's a Gemara in the Mishnah, the Gemara at the beginning of the second parak of Kedushin says, Rav Safra machrech reisha, that Rav Safra would singe the hairs off the head of a fish, of an animal, sorry, not a fish, of like an animal was being prepared for Shabbos. That was back in the day before you got, packets of cholent from the supermarket, and you had to do much more. But the idea, you see, is coming clearly. Rav Malach Shibuta, Rava would salt fish. He'd make, I guess, the modern equivalent of gefilte fish. Rav Huna Madlik Shraga, Huna would light candles. Now, you have to remember, these Amoraim were, some of them, very wealthy people. And they could have done these things themselves. The honor, so to speak, for Shabbos, in terms of what was done, would be the same thing. The fish would be salted, the head would be singed, whatever it would be. The fact of the matter is that they did it themselves. Now the Gemara has, Mishnah and the Gemara at the beginning of Parak Beis of Kedushin learns a tremendous principle, mitzvah yoseh bo b'mishluchoi, that it's better, and what better means, you have to see over there, it's better to do a mitzvah by yourself than to send an agent, a shliach, to do it. But in our particular case over here, when we're talking about covered, that's very clear, that's obvious. When a person does something himself, as Avram Avinu got up and himself, he prepared food for the what he thought were these travelers, he didn't send somebody to do it. The essence of covered is to do something as much as possible by yourself, because that shows more honor. Okay, so you let Rav Papa would twist the wicks of Shabbos candles, Rav Chisda would mince beets, Rabbi and Rav Yosef would split the wood, many examples here. Rav Nachman would lift up bundles of wood and shoulder them and bring them in and lift up the bundles that were cluttering up his living room to make room for the bundles of the wood for the fire. And Omar, he said, Ilu, Makalin li Rabbi Abi Vabasi, Mi lo Makat Feino, Kamaisa. He said, if Chachamim, Rav Ami and Rav Asi were come and visit me, would I not lift up and carry bundles on my shoulder for their sake? So surely when it comes to Shabbos, the same idea. Now, in fact, Rav Nachman would actually, it's an interesting thing, he would, and point of fact, this is the way we talk about Shabbos as a person, as an entity. We talk about being likrat Shabbat, to welcome Shabbos. Shabbat Malkasa, Shabbos the Queen. Shabbos has a kind of an identity of being not just the day, not just the time, but like some almost like a spiritual entity. Well, it is a spiritual entity, but almost like a person, so to speak. And Rav Nachman would take lessons from himself based on how he would think about how he could honor a person, and he would do the same thing when it came to Shabbos, setting the table in a certain way. Exactly do the same thing for Shabbos. And as that it says in Brachos, that it says that a person should have his eyes open, resourceful, when he's thinking about the Yiras Hashem. A person needs to spend time thinking out how he's going to honor Shabbos. I remember Rav Leib Kellerman, he once had a beautiful idea many years ago. He says, a lot of people, they say, oh, Shabbos is like so long, in the summer, and when's it going to get dark? And why is it that some people don't get it? Some people just like it's a tircha, it's a bother. So he said, basically, similar to this idea, Shabbos is like a person. Shabbos takes a walk down your street on Erev Shabbos. And Shabbos kind of peeks in the door and sees what's going on. And if he sees people are running around preparing for him to come, for her to come, he sees the candles being lit, the food being, everybody getting ready for Shabbos. So Shabbos will come and spend Shabbos with you. But if Shabbos, when he's walking down that street that Friday afternoon and he sees that people are not really, the table's not laid and like everybody's, wasting time, or they're not particularly looking forward to Shabbos coming to spend Shabbos by them. So Shabbos just keeps on walking down the street. And that's why a person who doesn't, it's not just, of course there's a psychological aspect to this, what a person invests in, he feels more about. Something we've discussed many times. The idea that the heart is drawn after the action. That when a person does things, this leads him to feel a certain way about those things. It's not just that a person thinks a certain way and therefore he feels a certain way because he feels a certain way, he acts a certain way, but the reverse is also true. By putting effort into something, it gives you a connection and an enthusiasm for that thing. That's all psychological, but there's a mystical level to it as well, which is what we're describing. That when you prepare for Shabbos, when you are ready to likrat Shabbos, Shabbos literally comes and bestows on you this feeling of Shabbos, that Shabbos is with you, that you're in Shabbos and Shabbos. And that's something which is not just psychological. It's not just a question of the results of your investment are paid back in your feelings. So this is a very important thing with everything in Yiddishkeit. The same with Torah. People say, "Oh, Rabbi, it's so difficult to learn Torah." If you really put everything you have into learning, and you're serious about it, you will feel the sweetness of the learning. It may not happen immediately, but it will definitely happen, because it's the Torah, so to speak, says, "Yeah, I want to be with this person." The Torah will give herself, so to speak, to the person who's prepared to give himself to her. So as we said, Rav Nachman would notice the things he would do because of, something, Shabbos is something, and Avodas Hashem in general is something which is sort of abstract. So he would take lessons from the way he would behave towards an honored human being and duplicate those. As we said, so a person should mechadesh hamitzvot nachas ruach liyotztrom. The whole idea is to extrapolate from one thing to another, as Rav Nachman did, and to devise innovations, because the whole point is that I want to give nachas ruach, so to speak, satisfaction to HaKadosh Baruch Hu in all the ways I can, and to demonstrate the more I mechabed HaKadosh Baruch Hu and His mitzvahs, the more that shows my feelings of gratitude and how much I have to say thank you to Hashem. That it's not, I don't deserve it. Zalom magiyali. And that brings to a state, so to speak, of how much Hashem is over us. Okay. And he goes on to say, Ashal ken kol ma sheyis yaches lo ziyeh nichbod aleinu b'chuvod gadol. Anything that we see as honor, we should try and do that for Hashem through doing His mitzvahs in that way. V'chivin shu yizbarach b'tuva hagadol im kol shlifluseinu rotza b'amnoseinu l'chal lachloik lonu kavod limsor lonu divrei kedushosoi. We see that Hashem, for all His incredible loftiness, but in His great goodness, He, compared with our tremendous lowliness, nevertheless, He wants in His great humility to apportion to us honor and to give over to us matters, things of His holiness. To share that, so to speak, to allow us to partake of that. So if that's the case, l'fachos b'chol kochenu nechabdem. So for sure, with all our power, therefore, we have to honor those things as Hashem, so to speak, is reaching down to us in such a way. V'nareh hayaka asher lehem etzleinu, and to demonstrate the tremendous value that we feel about the mitzvahs. V'tirech shezos hi hayira hamitis shehi yiras haromamus shezachanu sheba tolu Yaakov hamiskarev el chibuv ha'ava. This is an important point. This attitude of reverence is what's called yiras haromamus, which is the fear of Hashem's exaltation, which is the true yira. And not, we mentioned this beforehand, and of course that yiras haromamus, this awe of Hashem, is dependent on to the extent that we are mechabed at Hashem. The feeling of Hashem's, the exaltation, our feeling of yira, again, or AWE, as opposed to yiras oynish. We're not talking about the fear of punishment. We're talking about the awe in which we hold Hashem will directly depend on the degree to which we respect Him and we mechabed the mitzvahs and go to great lengths to treat the mitzvahs and therefore Kadosh Baruch Hu with the utmost respect and awe. That evokes in our hearts this awe. That is the true yiras haromamus. And that is our only attachment. That deep reference gets closer to the level of chibuv, love of the mitzvahs out of love. The yira, as we said before, the yiras haromamus has to come first. Awe precedes love. And love, true love, real love for Hashem cannot come unless it comes through this channel of awe. On Kamosha Echtoiv Oid, I'm going yet to write, Besat Hashem, Besat Dishmaya, Masha Ein Ken Yiras Oynish, as we said before, this is not connected with the fear of punishment. That's not the optimum fear. Now, as we said before, of course, Yiras Oynish is a stepping stone. A person who thinks that he can have true awe of Hashem without fearing Hashem in the literal sense of being scared of Hashem is fooling himself. No true awe can be actualized unless a person realizes with whom he's dealing. If a person understands that Hashem is powerful to the extent that he can hurt me, he can punish me. I'm totally in my life, everything is in His grasp. So when he has a fear of the punishment, that fear of the punishment can then develop into yiras haromamus or AWE, and only then that's the next step, he says, that becomes closer to doing the mitzvahs out of love. But it's not the optimum fear, we said, yiras onish. Okay, we'll take a pause here, and I think next week we'll carry on with talking about Covered Shabbos. There's some interesting ideas here. One idea, I'll just give you a preview, is that there's an idea actually to wear clothes which are not as nice on Friday, to give yourself more of a contrast, to not to eat as nice food, let's say. I have a little mishigas that I have many years ago. I found a shampoo that I really liked very much. So I said, I'm going to keep this just for Shabbos. All of these little things that you can do, which really you'll see make a big difference. Have a wonderful week. With Hashem, we'll pick up next week. Thank you.